What is up, everyone? Happy Friday. I am Charlie Shrem, and you are listening and watching Untold Stories, where twice a week we get to dive deep with some of crypto's most influential leaders to understand how this movement came to be and where we're going, because this industry is getting more and more complicated every single day. But that doesn't mean that we need to get scared of that and we need to be afraid of that. And that doesn't mean that we can't trade off of the fact that it's getting more complex. And my job here today, well, really, my job all the time is to take all of those complicated topics, explain it to you as stories, and try to have some fun doing it. And I'm really honored that the show is powered by the Blockworks group, blockworks.co. They are a production company that without them, Untold Stories would not be here today. And so I love those guys and girls. So thank you guys so much for producing this show. And with that, I am so doubly honored to have Dovey Wan. Dovey, I'm going to give a little introduction about you, but you are one of the most famous people in the crypto space. Thank you so much for taking the time and coming on Untold Stories today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Dovey, you are an investor, founder, mentor, advisor, crypto analyst, trader. You're the founding partner of Primitive Ventures, and you're an advisory board member of CoinDesk. You started your career at eBay, and you spent doing like from building products. Really, like eBay. It's interesting because for so long, eBay never had any competition because people
Yep.
didn't really. I guess people were in shock that this concept of having simply a online marketplace where people can bid and just do things with each other. It was just so brilliant and novel at the time. eBay had its like eBay moment or whatever. So you've been involved in a lot of these emerging technologies. We were joking earlier. You were saying it like emerging shit coins and stuff. But I really liked
Yep.
what you said. And I was wondering if you can repeat it. I asked you, "Hey, so what are you working on like cool these days?" And you gave me such a great answer.
Yeah, so I basically just like hopping between like parallel universes, and because like each individual like crypto ecosystem right now is living like organism and just a mini universe, and so because I think being like a trans like cultural person, and so I'm able to just like hop between like different civilization states. It is like not just like nation states, but like civilization states, and so like that's
Interesting.
why I love so like that's why I love about crypto as well, because like you're able to see a lot more beyond just your own background, and just like your own, so basically your own cultural background as well, and so like that's why I have been like working, reading, and just like breathing every day. Yeah.
You I like when you said transcultural. Is that the where did you get that
Mhm.
from?
Um, like transcultural and trans, like because I think eventually we are moving towards this like transhumanism, and so we want to go beyond Earth, and so like that is the ultimate goal we have. So like that is the ultimate goal we have as human being, or like Homo sapien as like a species, right? And but like before that, because so I have seen a lot of just like misunderstanding and like misunderstanding, discrimination like happen purely, it's like purely because of like say for instance, like Chinese people rarely live outside China, and like Western people rarely live like in another like non-developed country, right? And so I think a lot of things that like me take for granted, or just like consider as like a common sense, and so cannot be conveyed easily like to many Westerners, and so I think like that's why, so I have a term that's informational arbitrage,
Mm,
because like we all know how to do arbitrage, like like we all know how to do arbitrages between different exchanges, or like just like doing pure financial products arbitrage. But I think the most powerful arbitrage nowadays is the informational arbitrage, and just like the cultural arbitrage, and um
hmm.
so a lot of things emerging today in crypto. Say for instance, all this social token movement, person token movement, and like NFT and like stuff like that. I have seen such thing just like probably through my teenager age. Um, so a lot of this like Asian pop culture, just like so they have been around. So they have been around for so many years, but like not in the format of crypto, but it's completely proven business model. Um, so I think like the Westworld has been picking up and just like things like big cloud. And so like big cloud has been adopted. So like the big cloud model has been adopted long before in the Japanese like pop culture and so it's just like not surprise to me, and it's kind of like not that interesting and not that exciting to me, to be honest. But I think given this like COVID thing and like Western, it's like Westerners are tend to more outgoing, and so you guys hanging out in the bars and like doing a lot of like outdoorsy activity, and but I think like Korean, Japanese, and Chinese, and so they are living in this like cyberspace and just a virtual environment for like so many years, and just at the in-game purchase. So if you simply look at the in-game purchase like GDP, and so like you'll be wow, and so I think like that's like the future where the all this like crypto movement um is basically moving forward, like because everything gonna be virtualized and like everything gonna be highly digitized and so like this is how I live through my life, like just since I grew up.
DeFi, DeFi, DeFi. You keep hearing me talk about it, and we know at the same time that the stock market is at record highs, but the economy is broken in recession. Government debt is off the charts. They're printing trillions of dollars. We need a new financial system, and I've been talking about it. We've all been talking about it. Decentralized finance. We know that too. We know that there's like $40 billion in value sitting in all these DeFi protocols, and it's barely a year old. It's new decentralized finance and it's brilliant and it works. And there's a lot of money to be made in things like yield farming, being able to provide liquidity, but a lot of them are high risk. There's scams and rug pulls that are so common to investors. We don't want to repeat what happened a few years ago in the crypto space. But what if there was a way to access those DeFi yields in a safe and transparent way? Well, I have the CEO, Tim Frost of Yield.app, my newest sponsor on the show. Listen to that show and check out Yield.app, because here you have this team that is constantly filtering through all these DeFi investments. They're consolidating your gas fees, and they're only investing in a select few that generate more than 20%. But their risk is not, they're not just investing in these tokens and waiting for them to do well. They're also providing liquidity. They're doing yield farming, all these low risk, high investment to make the infrastructure more efficient and better. So not only you're investing in making money, but you're also helping to grow this ecosystem. Make sure you check them out at yield.app. That's yield.app. And listen to the Untold Stories with Tim Frost, the CEO. We have all these coins and tokens, and they sit on all these different blockchains, and we have to keep multiple wallets and different addresses and everything. And the only way to do it without having to do that is trust a centralized place like an exchange or a broker or an app that you use. Well, what if there was a way to do it without having to trust one different place in the ethos of crypto? Cosmos, my sponsor Cosmos, that has been around for so long, they're actually following their original roadmap and being able to offer universal wallet, high node synchronization, inter-blockchain communication, bridging Bitcoin and Ethereum together and keeping it all on one wallet, being able to build on top of it and do the coolest things possible. Make sure you check them out at stargate.cosmos.network. You can play with all these different features. It's so cool, and it's really bringing the next wave of crypto and adoption. If you really want to be ahead of everyone else and all your friends, make sure you understand the new technology that's coming out. stargate.cosmos.network. You're going to love it. The biggest problem with DeFi today as we know it is there are simply no aggregators or way to bring all of this information and data together so we can trade off of it. We're going to Uniswap and we're clicking sell, 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 or buy, buy, buy. I mean, imagine staying up till 2 o'clock in the morning just so you can make a trade. The folks at Paraswap, my newest sponsor, are doing exactly that. They are the fastest and most liquid aggregator on the Ethereum blockchain. They've built a state-of-the-art algorithm that aggregates all the major decentralized exchanges in order to beat the market price. They are willing to offer you on your first swap a 50% gas refund. Check it out in the show notes. I mean, there's no reason not to use PowerSwap. It's the same thing as using any of these other sites, but you're getting a better price, zero slippage, better swap, safer, faster, more secure. What's the downside? There is none that I could think of. And you're getting your first swap 50% gas fees paid for. It solves every problem that I could think of. Make sure you check them out. They're my sponsors. I love them, and I love them even more that they're pushing crypto forward. Let's start from when I was a kid. It all starts in the schools. In the schools that I grew up in, the information that was given to us about the Chinese tech community that was taught to
Uh-huh.
us, unfortunately, was just that the Chinese tech community, all they do is copy American innovation and counterfeit. Now, it is so ignorant and false, but you still hear that prevalent. Just on the radio this morning, I was listening to NPR, and today, I think yesterday, President Xi Jinping and President Biden, Premier Xi Jinping and President Biden were in Alaska, and their teams were in Alaska talking about something, and it the ended up getting into a fighting because
Yeah.
of a
It's like yep.
cultural reason. It was just simply you don't embarrass someone on camera. No matter what that person does, you don't embarrass someone on camera. And I guess the Americans did that. I'm not really sure. So in this situation, like where there's an ignorance of information, you're saying that the fact that we are like I'm potentially ignorant or I don't know or I won't seek out the information that I've been taught, the fact that I need to go out and think for myself, the fact that I'm not doing that is how you can make money.
Um, okay. So when it comes to informational arbitrage, and I think like the two trends are inevitable. And like the first one is, so personally, I think like globalization is inevitable. And because it's just like how the market, so like the market tends to move towards so the market tends to move towards like where like the friction is the least, right?
Yes.
And so like it will balance, like it will basically balance out itself like over time. So I think globalization is like definitely inevitable. So like have a very singular mindset that like the Western standard like is the right standard. And I think we'll pigeonhole. So we'll definitely pigeonhole not just American political leaders, but like also average citizens as well. Um, so because then most of them just like never look outside of like US or just the Western
Well, yeah,
developed world, right?
from day one, the Bitcoin and then the eventual like new altcoin Ethereum and then now the crypto community that we call ourselves, from day one, we all existed in IRC chat rooms and forum chat rooms that don't ask where you're from, the color of your
Yeah,
skin, things
yeah,
like
right.
that. It
Yeah,
was a
exactly,
username.
right?
So we were
Yeah, yeah.
globalized citizens from day one. That was the whole point of
Yeah,
this.
exactly. So it's the meta sovereign. So I think in the future, like all this and meta sovereign movement gonna converge, and like especially after this COVID thing. And one thing I think we can all agree on is we deserve better governments, right? So we deserve, like all of us, we deserve like better governors. Like no, so no matter it's mainland Chinese or like American or just like a British citizen. And so I think that's one consensus that like that we can reach on. And but on the contrary, all just like all these are more so like all the modern like political leaders, and so their job is not reaching consensus. So do you see the conflict there?
Yeah.
Like so like a small group of people like who are in the power, so they basically the default mode is to fight with each other. So it can be bipartisan fight, it can be geopolitical fight, and so the whole system is just not working like as it's supposed to. So we basically need something that's meta solvent and like something parallel, and so we can reach consensus like much easier. And so Bitcoin eventually is a consensus system, right? So um like like the
Market
greatest thing
efficient
about
consensus. It's market efficient consent. It's it's making what was brilliant about Bitcoin is that it took greed and it tokenized it. It said, okay, we understand that we need to build consensus and then we're all going to be fighting with each other. But if we make it where we're financially incentivized to get to a consensus together, then that's what will motivate us.
Yeah, yeah. And so like there's basically no rent seeking and there's no
Mm,
monopolize of power that like you can sit on it forever. So yeah, so I think like when you're saying how to do information arbitrage or like or like because of like things that you don't know or like things like you have no visibility to, like doesn't mean that they don't exist, right? And so and like the other thing is that what's good about this like power struggle is um so China, Japan, and like Korea, and so it's much easier for us like to learn like what's going on like from the US. And so because you mentioned like at the very beginning, like there's a lot of this like counterfeit problem and just Chinese entrepreneur like basically copy whatsoever in the US and like just like bring back and then have some minor innovation and
mm.
then make it localized. And so I think at the very beginning it's true because it's much easier for us to learn what's going on from the US and like the most cutting edge thing. And but it's harder. So right now I think we are at this like diverging point. There's a lot of major innovation, like original innovation, happening within just like within Chinese community, Japanese community, Korean community. But I think the barrier, like the know-how barrier, is so it's much higher for the American. So it's much harder for American so to understand like what's going on there. So it might be
It is.
language barriers or like cultural
No,
barrier,
it's a
but I think
cultural
there's just like
barrier. Like the whole did you I was joking around the other day with the BitMEX folks because they released their book. BitMEX released a book that I
yeah,
recommend everyone read,
like
The Blocksize War.
so
But I
Blocksize
w
Wars, yeah.
but I was joking around to some of the folks at BitMEX, and I said, "The whole thing was just because of miscommunication. The whole block size debate was just all miscommunication and cultural and social differences. That's all it was, I feel like, at the end of the
Uh,
day."
I think partially, and so I think that partially is communication or like loss in translation.
Mhm.
Largely, I think is a ego fight.
Of course.
Um, like Jihan's ego, and so
I forgot
so
about
so
Jihan. Is he still around? Oh my god, I haven't heard that name in forever.
like Jihan is so like he's still around, like he has been pretty low profile, and so I think he recently done with the fight with his co-founder, and um yeah,
Yeah.
so I think he pays off for his ego in a pretty high cost.
Yes.
Like the cost of his like the power position within Bitmain and like the trust from the investors
A lot of
and
people learned from
um
that too.
yeah, exactly. So I think like that's what all these like Bcash shares. So like all these like Bcashers and they all share this like weird ego problem to some extent.
Hostility. They have a hostility to them.
And yeah, so like that's just my observation. So it seems like most of these like high profile BCH just like Bcashers and so they all have some like weird ego problem. And so I think like Charlie, you might have like more insights towards that, but um yeah, so like that's just my read
The only way
and I think like the other thing, like if we talk about the whole like the forking history, and there's a lot of people that's being very like very undervalued, just a local Chinese Bitcoiner. And so they have fought like bitterly with Jihan, but like they're like probably not known by the Western community. So I think like after this like Bitman drama and there's like a narrative that miners are evil, but that's not necessarily true. And so there's a lot of like good miners, so at least like chaotic good miners, chaotic Chinese miners out there, so they have supported, so they have like so they're on
yeah.
the right side at the very beginning. So
Yes.
um
It wasn't
yeah,
fair
so
that it became Bitcoin miners became demonized unfairly, and that it's finally thawing. But that block size debate unfairly pitched miners against the rest of the community. But that wasn't. That's not. It
yeah,
was just all wrong. All the words that were used, the arguments were all red herrings. It was just some of the most demoralizing time in our whole industry. But it's a great. But you needed it to happen. We needed to figure out
Mhm.
how to
Yep.
like break and reach consensus. Just the same thing like the 2017 ICO world needed to happen because we learned from that. We would these these now companies that are raising money, they're learning how to do treasury management, how to manage all of this money that they're raising, how to do it the right way. The standards are higher. The self-regulatory organizations that we have, the standards, the investors that are investing are have much more moral high ground now where they're
Mhm.
forcing the companies to like you're forcing your startup founders and your investors to like maintain certain standards. And for
Yep.
example, like how even tokens are released to the founders and the advisors, like simple things like that are changing. But I want to ask you a question. And I kind of want to, because I was having this conversation with someone in the elevator this morning. And then I was like, oh, I'm speaking to Dovey Wan later. And then he's like, oh, like, because he's a part of the team at Voyager. And I was like,
Uh-huh.
we were talking about open finance. So we're talking
Yep.
about open finance and how if you look at open source code and
Mhm.
that the blockchains that we have today, and let's assume that the whole world as we know it, the whole not just financial world, but the whole credit and capital markets, mortgage, home equity lines of credit, how you do,
Mhm.
if you want to get a factory in China to make a product for you and how it gets overseas, all the financial money movement in the whole world. Let's just assume that that's eventually going to move over to this mix of like open source software and then closed blockchains that are public or enterprise, but they still all have to talk to each other. Do you think that's where we're ending up? And then if you take that question and you remember the conversation that we had earlier with the Chinese and the American team, if we eventually like a team that we're like debating how they can have economic cooperation over the next 10 years, if we're moving towards a digital open source economic cooperation, globalized humanity, what they're talking about up in Alaska, does it matter? Who cares? Why do we need governments to make economic cooperation if we can do it on our own?
Yeah, I think that's a meta question for sure.
Yeah, it's a meta question.
So I think
That's like my whole
okay,
podcast. I ask these very
right.
broad questions.
I know. Yeah. So I think eventually we will probably get there, but I think in between, so there will be a I think like there will be like a turning point, and like a turning point, something as a like a Brendan Wood, like just like the Brendan Wood 2.0 type of thing, right?
Hmm.
And so if you think about this, uh, like US dollar, like US dollar is weakened and weakened.
Yes.
And so a lot of so many other central banks around the world, like, and they're just like offloading like US Treasury as their own reserve, and like so like starting from Russia, right? And so
That's the
like
reason the yield is going up. People don't realize
yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
'cause they're dumping treasuries.
And and so like United States for like last 40, 50 years and has been exporting its inflation. So like that's why it can keep the inflation rate low. Because as long as like the world commodity is actually denominated and traded by the US dollar, and they can just like keep printing and like export like the inflation, and then basically have the other central bank, so like have the other central bank's foreign exchange reserve like as so like as the Fed's as the Fed's ATM machine, right? And so like that's how the
Yes.
current fiat system is working. I think it will collapse, and like so it's not like collapse, but there will be like a turning point. Like
A
all the central
diversification
bankers, like
away from the dollar,
like
maybe? Like it's just a diversification away from the dollar or like a new
yeah,
global fiat
SDR,
reserve
yeah.
standard. So
Yeah,
so
so like there, so I think like there will be like a turning point that all these central banker have to sit together and like talk about like what gonna be so like what gonna be the ultimate denomination, and because like all the bankers like so like all the central bankers and like political leaders, and they cannot build trust with each other, right? So like so just like we have discussed, and because like their whole job is not forming consensus, so they have to go with something that's no one can control, like that's meta sovereign, that's not in the hand of the so like that's not in the hand of individual nation state, and so it can be gold, it can be
wait,
Bitcoin, like it can be anything
you're
that's meta
telling
sovereign.
me that the move to a Bitcoin like reserve standard won't come from like the people, but rather it'll be decided by nation states because they'll need a reserve asset that none of them can control. Is that kind of what you're saying?
I think the bottom-up movement, like, okay, so the top-down movement, and so like the top-down movement is,
Oh,
okay,
it'll
central banker
converge.
realize that, right? And like the bottom-up movement does not like contradictory. So it is not contradictory with that top-down movement as well. So like it can happen simultaneously. And
Yeah,
so
that's
like basically
crazy.
the, so like the converging point is, so I think the converging point is, okay, um like average citizen realize like cash is just shitcoin, right? So fiat is shitcoin, and they will also chasing yield. So they will also chasing yield and like chasing basically like chasing the maintenance, like chasing the so chasing preservation
Yeah,
of the purchase power.
you're chasing, yeah, you're chasing, it's chasing the yield. You said it right first. It's your if the coffee cost $1 today and it may cost $2 a year from now, I need to make sure I can turn that $1 into $2 1 year from now.
Um,
You're protecting your
and
purchasing power. So you can
right,
buy that same
exactly.
product today versus next year without having to spend more money.
Right, and so all the central bankers, so they have to chase whatever yield out there as well, because like they have to make sure like their like pension is still working in like 50 years. And so I think we all know that the U.S. Social Security program like is actually pretty shaky, and so they probably cannot pay off like the full, like probably
Mm.
cannot pay the full amount like in about 20 years. And so that there's a lot of this uh like aging population problem, and like all the governments are facing right now. And I think like if so like like that's why everybody is saying, okay, it's fine, we can basically print all our way like into MNT, and just like the Bank of Japan set us a really good example. But the problem with Japan is their
Japan was the first
income,
one
their
to do it, right? Japan was the first one to do it in like 1973. They invented QE. It's
yeah,
actually a
right.
Japanese term.
So like the problem with Japan though is um like there's just no vibrancy. So like I'm not sure you've lived in that society, but like the vibrancy is
Yeah.
just
No,
not
I know what
there.
you
And
meant.
so it's kind of sad. Like so like if
They call
I
it the
so
lost decades, right? They call it the lost era. Like
mhm.
the Japanese people will call, and it keeps extending because their GDP is not, since the
So it's
70s,
flattened.
is
Yeah,
just
so it's
flat.
everything is flat. So it's everything is flat.
It's kind
And
of
then
sad.
like even sexual activity, dude, like sexual
Yeah, they won't
activity.
married kids, nothing.
Yeah, yeah, right. So I think it's definitely a declining society, and I think that's like a very dystopian future. Like if all the
No,
government
because
just
it's the future of America. People don't realize that the whole Japanese economic system that was built by America after World War II to counteract communism that was growing in Asia. So they pumped America, printed, had all this money, they put it all into Japan. Why, you ever wonder why, like post colonial, like when America colonized Japan, everyone was so happy and they were friends. American and Japanese are best friends. It's like, when have you ever seen, someone colonizing another country and they're best friends? It's because of the amount of money that was America built up, but they built it up, like you said, on this long-term exporting of inflation to the rest of the world. But that's running out. So what's happening in Japan could be a future view of what could happen in the United States.
yeah, and so
Sad.
it's pretty sad for me, because whenever I visit whenever I visit Japan, and you can see just my grandpa like age, like pretty old dude, and they're like still working really hard. They're like driving taxi, and they're just like working at a convenience shop and 24/7 shift, and so it's kind of sad. And so I think the social safety net is actually not there, and a lot of people literally just die alone, and so they basically die in their tiny apartment and for like 30 days, and like no one knows about it. And I think it's very sad. And so like I remember I remember when we talk about this, and so with my another Bitcoiner friends, and Japan has been through this extremely extravagant, so it's like very luxury and like extravagant days, um just like right before the collapse, right? And so I think it's just like sound money like leads to, so like sound money as Bitcoin, and so like sound money will eventually lead to diligence, and bad money basically fiat, and so bad money will lead to extravagance, and so I think it's a completely two like different like paradigm, and because like consumerism like has enslaved a lot of us, right? And so people just like keep spending, and then like all the merchants and just like brands, and so they're basically launching minor differences and just like make your selection
Sure.
like a lot harder,
Money's
and
cheap
so
right now.
yeah, so like this is just not sustainable, and this just not sustainable, and like will collapse at like a turning point, and yeah.
Could they so like when for the past 30 or 40 years, the dollar wasn't a representation of the American worker. The dollar was like a representation of the global worker because we were exporting inflation. We were loaning out money to all these third world countries in the beginning, are economically undeveloped places, and forcing them to pay it back in dollars too at certain rates. So we're exporting that, and it's relying on the fact that when we print $5 trillion that we just printed this year, whatever it was, we're relying on the fact that we can grow the economy fast enough to counteract how cheap money is, and counteract that inflation, but that never will end up being
Yeah.
because yeah.
So I think like the problem is like when you just have like this like massive like liquidity flush the market, and like you basically cannot control where this liquidity is going, right? And so like so the liquidity is not going to like small to medium business, and to have like better like salary of the workers, like things like that. So all the liquidity basically flush into the financial system, and
Yes.
like pushing all the asset price. So like that's why you can see like inflation is low, because the inflation is just reflection of the CPI, and like does not include, okay, just like the college tuition, the Medicare cost, and like the asset prices, and so basically the liquidity goes into something like what's considered as like store of value,
Could the
right?
dollar ever be
So
backed by Bitcoin? Could you see the dollar be backed by Bitcoin just like the dollar was backed by gold at one point,
yeah,
or any
so I
currency?
think gonna be portionally just like probably like partially backed by Bitcoin. So like that's like entirely possible. Um, and I think so. Okay, so the weird thing right now is, think about Tesla, right? So like if I think about the Tesla gameplay, I think it's super smart, because at Tesla, so if like Tesla wants to borrow money, so the bond rate, so like I think it's like bond rate is basically junk, right? So it's like higher end of like the junk rating,
Sure.
and so it's kind of hard for like Tesla to borrow money directly, and but like they can actually like issue more shares, and just to sell the shares, and then have the cash, and then now they have over 10% of their just like the cash on the balance sheets, just like sits in the form of Bitcoin, and because Bitcoin is a very pristine collateral, and now they can actually borrow against Bitcoin.
Is there any better collateral in the world than Bitcoin right now?
uh okay, depends on how, so depends on what is your underwriting criteria, right? And so I think probably real estate and property, just that property in some very like prime location, and so probably can be as good as Bitcoin. But other than that, if we consider liquidity and like liquidity and like global pricing and like all that, and like Bitcoin is definitely the best.
And how
So
easy it is
so
to use, yeah.
yeah, so I think like the gameplay for Tesla is super smart, and like Tesla stock itself is part of the NASDAQ 100 index. And because the Fed right now has to go purchase, and so basically Fed is effectively buying a Bitcoin backing
Yeah,
just
you're right.
like index, right? So like if you think about this like
That's how it
circulation,
starts. Yeah.
yeah, so it becomes super weird, and so people probably don't realize that. But effectively, these two parallel universes, these are two different monetary systems, they're already interacting with each other at a pretty core level.
I I'm trying to like understand. I'm trying to understand how, like, when I missed that turning point. Like when like right now if I tell you, find me someone in the world that won't settle a trade or a debt with some Bitcoin. If there's a someone has a debt anywhere in the world right now, and if someone tried to repay that debt with Bitcoin or collateralize something, I don't think there are very many people in the world as we know it that won't say this is stupid. No, I won't do it. Because even if they do, they know that Bitcoin, even if they think Bitcoin is the dumbest thing in the world, they know that it's the most liquid dumbest thing in the world. So when did I miss that? When was that turning point? Was it recent or was it a long time ago? It's kind of crazy.
Uh, so I think another just probably not like not even Bitcoin, and so because so there's a lot of like this like tether thought before, right?
Yeah.
And one thing I think a lot of Westerners missing is like Tether or just the USDT. USDT itself, like like you said, right now Bitcoin has been like the acceptance rate for Bitcoin as a medium of exchange or like whatever collateral is like, extremely high, right?
Yeah.
And but like even before that, so I think like the Tether story
Yeah.
is also a good I think also a really good representation of that. So Tether's liquidity in mainland China is so good, and local Chinese like does not care whether it's 100% backed by US dollar, because like as long as my counterparty is willing to trade with me at close to 1 to 1 peg, and like I don't have to worry whether like
Yeah.
at the end of the day whether like Tether can actually redeem that or not, right? So because the liquidity is so it's basically deep enough, and so my
Yes.
counterparty is okay to accept that, then I can trade. So I basically don't care whether like Tether can eventually go redeem it for it or not. So currency business at the end of the day is just a trust and consensus business, and then all this like currency becomes just a pure symbol. So it's
Dovey,
a
like the dollar started because it was a silver and gold backed currency. And then the world as a whole believed in gold. So when the dollar was like, it's going to be backed by gold, the dollar was just basically like the first gold ETF. It was that people could buy dollars to have an easy way to get in and out of gold. But then the dollar got off the gold standard. And so what you're saying is it didn't like just collapse, but what we're seeing is this kind of like the dollar is all trust now. It's all based on trust.
yep.
So if the dollar just loses that trust even one time on the world stage, it's over. And I actually have a great story for you. I have a great story to explain this to
Yeah.
everyone.
Uh-huh.
When I was in prison, the 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 currency in prison was the mackerel, a fish. Like you could buy, you can buy in the grocery store single uses of tuna fish or any fish you like,
Uh-huh,
and you could put
uh-huh.
on crackers in a sandwich and eat it.
Yeah.
In prison, and I'll talk to you like all the attributes, but the currency that was used in prison
Uh-huh.
that you can use to go to commissary, you can get someone to give you a haircut, a personal trainer at
Yep,
the
yep, yep,
gym. There was a
yep.
whole economy, tens of thousands was the mackerel, was the fish. And in my locker, I would have like stacks of them. It would my savings. I had a job. Everyone had a job. Everyone had a hustle. Everyone worked in the economy,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
this was our currency. So if, look at mackerel for a second as like the gold backed dollar. So mackerel was already it's already had utility outside of prison. So everyone knew already coming into it. So these mackerel packets were just a way to have a physical representation of value
Yep.
that we already had
Yeah.
agreed upon outside in the
Yeah.
world. And this
So it's like
became our
pure symbolic, right? Yeah.
purely symbolic, but at the same
Yeah.
time, it had a built-in deflationary system because you could only 500 inmates were in this
Yeah.
in the prison. Every inmate could only buy 14 mackerel from the commissary once a week. So the inflation
Mhm.
rate was 500 times 14. So it's like
Yeah.
Bitcoin. We knew what the
Yeah.
inflation rate was. But on top
Yeah.
of that, I would say 20% or maybe even 30%, maybe even 50 of mackerel were actually eaten. They were eaten.
Mhm.
I would eat them after. Like, I would save them and I would accept it as payment because every day when I went to the gym and I came back from the gym, there was no better source of protein with low
Mhm.
carbohydrates on the whole compound. I would
Yeah.
make a bowl of
Yeah.
rice, I put fish in it, I put cheese, you can
Yeah.
make a great dish. Then what
Yeah.
happened? Inmates are unfortunately in prison for a very long time, like 30 years, 40 years. The mackerel doesn't last that long in the packets. It expires
Yeah.
in like 10 years or 8 years or whatever. Same thing. Let's look at that now as the transitioning of the dollar from a gold backed currency to a just by federal decree, fiat. So, what happened was one day I was getting a soda and I asked the guy who was selling sodas near my bunk, how much is this soda? And he said, well, you can give me one mackerel or you can give me two of these money macs. And I said, what's a money mac? And he told me it's expired mackerel. So there was another currency that exists that had a 2-to-1 exchange rate of expired fish. So it had no utility. You couldn't eat it anymore. Why would it trade? But it did. Right now, when I was in jail, I had savings. I had mackerel that I could eat, but then you had the expired ones. And so you
Uh-huh.
could go to someone and buy something like the personal trainer who would charge you 2 mackerel. He would say, if you only have money max, the expired ones, you can give me 4. So here I am getting a guy to train me in the gym, and I'm giving him 4 of these oily packets
Expired.
of expired fish that have no, like, you can't eat them
Yeah.
anymore. And
Yeah.
here I'm like, I'm not, I'm a student of economics. I'm not an economist by any means, but I'm a student of economics. I love studying and theorizing like you, like all these different monetary theory. And I'm like, what the hell is going on here? Right. Okay. So here we go. This is where your story came in. What did you just say to me a minute ago? You said that the biggest problem with like stimulus and all these things is that the money doesn't go to small businesses. It just gets pumped into the financial markets. And so there's no way to say that if we print money and it's evenly distributed again to people that are going to be the
Yeah.
workers like pushing the economy forward, then it doesn't work. Printing money doesn't work, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
so um what happened was one day there was an inmate who had like I think like 30% of the whole supply of these money macs or 50% of the whole supply of just the money mackerels he had. He was like hoarding them. And
Mhm.
one day the administration kicked him out. I forgot he got sent away somewhere. And the administration didn't know that the money macs actually were the currency of prison. They didn't know this.
Mhm.
The market cap
Mhm.
was probably like $20,000. There's probably
Mhm.
$20,000 worth of these expired fish circulating in this prison right now. So you know what happened? They took they basically printed stimulus. They took all the expired mackerel and they just left it in the room in the cafeteria for anyone to take. And overnight, because they debased it by 30% almost, it
Uh-huh.
lost all of its value. The money max ceased to exist the next day. You couldn't trade it anymore. It collapsed as a whole
So
currency. People's life savings got wiped away. Same thing can happen to the dollar. I've been preaching it for years. I don't want it to happen. My savings is in the dollar, but it can happen. And unfortunately, it's scary.
yeah, so I think like that's why like all the stimulus like literally just goes to like any kind of like SOV, right? It's like any
Yeah.
kind of possible SOV. Like people don't care about like risk anymore. It's just as long as it can, like as long as it can keep up, just just like keep going up in value, and so like that's what they're looking for. And then like, also I think nowadays I see a phenomenon that many of my peers or like even my so and probably the younger generation as well, um they don't want to work like they don't want to have like an actual job, and so they're basically a trader. So it's a full-time trader, it's a full-time degen. um and I think that's a phenomenon I have seen in both US and like China. um so young people don't want to be founders because building a real company, a like a real business is pretty hard. And why not just like gamble in the stock market, and why not just like degen, right? And uh I think it's like a
Oh
very bad
shit.
like downward. So
It's
it's like a
scary.
really bad like, yeah, so it's a really bad like downward like spiraling loop. So like fewer and fewer talents wants to go to the actual like productivity, like the actual industry, like they can yield productivity, but all goes to the industry, like they would just say purely just say like yielding yields, and it's just weird.
I think we're both in agreement, but I want to try to like leave off with some optimism here. And of course, buy Bitcoin is always the message. But what can people do? What can governments do to like level it off here and to prevent us from going into this like crazy, hyperinflation dollar devaluation world that we could potentially go into?
I think the problem is right now the whole Fed system is not independent anymore, and it's basically a
Political, yeah.
so it's like a toolkit for this bipartisan like political game, right? And if the Fed cannot be independent, and like if the Fed cannot just make like economically reasonable decision, uh, I just don't know. So because like, the Fed
Yeah.
is right now kidnapped by the whole like the physical, so like by the entire physical policy, and it is not monetary policy anymore. So it's more as a like a combo of like fiscal policy, right? So I personally I have little hope, and especially like given the American political system, like we have seen its weakness, and it's like every
Mm,
4 years, and like there will be a gigantic moment of like inefficiency and this. So I think the drama is just not
and fear,
like
yeah,
not even
like
worth
the
like
block
paying
size
attention
debate.
at all. But like we just like waste so much like energy, time, and like just like resources like as like a whole society, and so like this so they basically it's like no point, right? um so so like just like when we invest in a company, and like the founder is the most premium asset of that company, right? And I think it is the same for a nation state. Like the leader of that nation state sets the ceiling of
Mm,
the future growth. So from that perspective, I'm very like pessimistic on the future of US in general. Um, so I'm very optimistic for countries like Singapore, to be honest. Like because Singapore, first of all, is like small, and so it's very small. It's operate just like so, like the nation operates like a company, and so it's like highly efficient. And then also it's a really good hybrid of so
sure.
it's a really good hybrid of the West and the East. So I'm very
And it's being
bullish on
studied.
Singapore.
I'm bullish too. It's being studied because coronavirus taught us that there could be positive trade-offs with centralization in some way. Not that I'm an advocate for it, but I guess the whole point of like life and the whole point of this show and everything is that the things that you were taught as a kid are probably not true. And if anything that you do or trade off of or work or converse is based off of information or things that someone told you, maybe it's time that we go and we like look into that for ourselves and try to make our own decisions. There is look at I had a tweet today about it too. I said people don't realize that the power is in the people. I write on every check that I write or every letter I write. If I write you a letter, I always sign it with vires in numeres, strength in numbers. That's all we have. We are the
Yep.
global worker. It's beautiful.
Yep.
Thank you,
Yep.
Dovey, for coming on Untold Stories today. I really appreciate you.
Thank you, Charlie. Yeah.